right, guys. Well, thank you guys sharing again your guys' input when it comes down to, purchasing a home, owning versus renting, all that stuff. My next question for you guys, and tell me a little bit about what you guys have currently been seeing in the news. Like, based on what you've been seeing on the news, what you hear from family, friends, what are some of the real estate predictions that you guys think are going to happen in the next coming years in your respective markets?
Yeah, I think we're probably, and this is all prediction, and so, who knows, right? I think from my perspective, right, and what I think is like, I have a feeling that we're going to stay in kind of this market for a while. I think interest rates are going to be kind of, at the levels that they are for an extended period of time. I don't know. These are just like, thoughts and just like what I'm thinking, right? And so, I think maybe like in terms of like trends, I can see a lot of folks kind of leaning towards either continue to rent and learn their markets, right? Or I can also see, the maybe like joint effort of buying like a home, right? Like whether or not that is a person, individual kind of working towards that savings and buying a home with like another family member or maybe like a friend. I feel like that's going to be kind of more the trend that we're going to see, at least kind of in the market that I'm in Seattle, right? Given that home prices are quite high.
Mhm.
Um, and so I don't know. That's what I'm thinking. I don't know. What about you guys? Like, what do you guys think is going to happen with this market?
What's it called? A quick comment on that too, Katie. Right now, you said that you're seeing joint effort from people. Like, what do you mean? Like, people are buying homes together?
That's what
Like,
I'm thinking, right? I think like even like, I think in the past, right, maybe like, decades ago where, traditionally, I'm putting in air quotes, right? I think a lot of people with like either they'll have like a partner, they'll get married, they buy a house, right? I feel like now like people are wanting to kind of go, they want to go buy that purchase and make that big, commitment for a house, right?
yeah.
But I can see like, instead of having each individual kind of wait for a period of time to go and save, I can see people kind of putting like their efforts for joint savings together to buy like that home and then sharing that property together. That's something that I can see happening more commonly. In addition to, I think for people who have already kind of bought properties, right? I can see like the trend of people wanting to go and buy like that second, third, and do the whole rental thing. I feel like that's also like a common thing that I'm seeing out here in Seattle, right? And so those are just kind of trends that I'm noticing and things that I think are going to continue on moving forward. So
Nice. Bartholomew?
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of negative publicity around real estate right now just because the interest rates, the Fed announcements that are going to be up and coming, and the pricing. Because when you look at and you compare income growth for just the general population in the US versus real estate prices, housing is very unaffordable. So keeping that in mind, I at least in California and probably Florida, I do think that those will be ongoing issues, and pooling together is a very strategic way to go about it. So I think as we see more and more of that, I think that will become more of a reality for many of us. I know trying to help out my siblings, it's that sort of situation where because it's low income, and now the strategic way to go about it is, hey, you got to probably do this together unless you figure out how to make more income. um, because it's either you spend less to save more or you just make more, and oftentimes it's hard for most to do both well. So I think going back to being prepared, best thing we can ever do, just be prepared. And the I think the positive for those that are prepared, I think because less buyers are in the market and the listings that do stay longer on the market, I think there's potential for negotiation there, depending on the circumstances. We're going into the holidays, so there's going to be less inventory through the holidays, and then come the new year, it's kind of refresh. But uh, we're basically at an all-time low for inventory, and we'll see. But I think anybody that is prepared, good for you.
What's it called? Something I want to comment on for you both of you. Not even comment on, but like, have you guys seen like those homes that they're trying to sell now, where it's like literally one big house, like right, one big house, and then they have a little smaller house off to the side, but it's still connected to the main house. It just has its separate entrance.
I've seen that, and I've also seen how people are kind of split off. They buy a plot of land, they'll split the lot, right? And so, I see this even around my own home, right? Out here is like, people will buy like a stretch of land in a pretty, nice location, right? And they'll actually build like either it's like a row of townhomes, and then they'll use like the back lot as their own personal residence, and they'll build something either smaller or they'll build like a single family home. But I've also seen that, and I've seen folks kind of even do like the split lot, whether or not it's like keep the main house on the primary land, and then they'll build like the tiny home, in the back. And I've seen that as well, right? And see this kind of all the time in this area. And I see this a lot of times in like a lot of like I know people are doing like whole Airbnb, the whole rental, vacationing, short-term rentals, all that stuff too, and doing kind of like that. It's kind of more of a strategic, right? If you're kind of going into trying to figure out like how do you go in towards that rental market, like those are just some strategies that I've noticed too. Kind of similar to what you're thinking, Juan, with like the whole like the side home with the separate entrance and all that good stuff. So
No, we're definitely moving in that direction. And I mean, I bring it up because that's what we're talking about, right? That we're seeing that there's people taking on, joint ventures when purchasing a home. Even a friend of mine, like he's moved out to Oregon, right? And his plans already, he's telling me like, oh, when I move back, you think like I could move in with you, like, in a little house in the backyard. So he's already like thinking about that. I'm like, oh, like, yeah. And like to myself, I'm thinking that wouldn't be a bad idea. So again, it just goes back to doing things jointly together, whether it's with, significant other or with friends, things like that. Something that you just mentioned right now that kind of caught my eye was the whole Airbnb market. Like, I'm sure a lot of us have heard that Airbnbs, compared to earlier years, um, probably compared to COVID times, our Airbnbs are now kind of taking a plunge. What do you guys think about that? Is it still a successful like market or a successful like venture for somebody to follow moving forward?
Yeah, I think it's successful for those that are in it for the long term. Those that are just short-sighted will drop off. And I mean, anybody that has a large market share for their particular region, I think it's still going to be well for them. Tourism is not going to slow down. If there's another wave of COVID, then I mean, great for them too, because it's kind of like a repeat of what happened before. When I think the going back to one comment on the having like an ADU type on a lot, the very important part about it is that it's permitted too, because otherwise you're missing out on value when it comes to an assessor and an appraisal point of view, because unless it's permitted, there's really no value unless the buyer sees the value there. But on title, on paper, the value comes from being permitted.
Interesting. That's got me thinking now because what's it called? Earlier in the year, my girlfriend and I we went to Solvang and it was this house and they had this little side thing on the side where I mean I don't know if it was permitted or not, but, I don't want to throw anybody under the bus. But point is it was so nice and everything. So I was like, her and I were talking about like this would be really, really nice, like having a place over here with something on the side that you can rent out. So again, all these conversations that they're just constantly rolling around my life. What's it called? So I don't know, I just find that very fascinating where what's it like I didn't stop to think like, oh yeah, you need to have it, permitted, especially if you're thinking about selling a place like that, or if you're a buyer yourself, like, ask the question, is it permitted or not? And then see what's the value that you can get out of it, or not get out of it, depending if it's permitted or not. So
Mm.
I probably repeated myself a lot there, huh? Didn't I?
For emphasis.
For
Yeah,
emphasis,
because
it's everybody.
it's really the most important at the time of sale. If you're using it as is, right? Like, there's probably not going to be any question. Uh, and this is not like construction or builder advice, but just what I've seen and experienced from my own clients is, yeah, we miss out on potential value because things are not permitted.